This is the Jocko Underground Podcast, number 93, sitting here with Echo Charles. This is me, Jocko Willink, and we're going to talk about the Eagles versus the Rattlers. You know anything about this? No, you don't. This was the culmination of an experiment that was a psychological and a sociological experiment that was conducted in the late 1950s, early 1960s. A guy named Muzafer Sherif, he was a Turkish-American social psychologist. He was alive from 1906 to 1988. And back in the day, you could do some wild stuff with experiments, right?
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know, we can discuss. This one wasn't, I actually think this one was kind of okay. I might be wrong, but and also it's an experiment that you can see just play out all the time. So they took 22 11-year-old boys and they brought them to a camp. They were all white kids with similar middle-class backgrounds, so they're pretty similar kids, 22 of them. They split them into two different teams. At first, they didn't even know each other. They weren't together at first. And they spent a few days just doing activities separate. They didn't know the other team existed. So they just show up at a camp and they have 11 guys total on a team. And they start doing like hiking together. They're swimming. They're playing games like fun, not competitive against each other games, but like, oh, let's try and do this. Let's swim over there. Let's go for a hike. Just kind of doing things together. And they just did these cooperative events as a team, and they started to like form bonds and become friends. This was like a 4 or 5 day period, and they ended up, each of them independently, coming up with names for their little team. One of them called themselves the Eagles. The other ones called themselves the Rattlers. And then they made shirts, they made flags. They like got kind of fired up. They were part of this crew. And then they took the two groups and they brought them together. And they started to put them in competitive games and situations. And they started to develop a prejudice against each other. And they would do things, they would like have a picnic. They would do a combined picnic, but one of the teams, they would set it up so one of the teams would get there early and eat all the food from the other team. And then that kind of escalated. The Eagles eventually burned the Rattlers' flag. The Rattlers invaded the Eagles' cabins and stole their gear and vandalized their stuff. And eventually the researchers had to physically separate the two groups. Then they put them into a 2-day cooling off period, where they just got to relax. They didn't create any more hostilities between them. And then they had them, during that time, write words to describe what the other group was like. And you can imagine, the other group is conniving and, evil and all that kind of stuff. And my group is good and we're upstanding. And then what they did was they brought them together. And now they had them work, and this was really interesting to me. They had them work on projects together where, in order to be successful, they had to work together. And it was mutually beneficial to both teams. And when they did that they found was the best way to unify both groups together. And unify both groups together and reduce conflict. A superordinate goal. This is interesting. This is what I've been calling for the last 2 years, I think, is climbing the ladder of alignment. What are we aligned on? And the other interesting thing is when they just had them hang out together, for instance, they'd say, hey, you guys are going to watch a movie together tonight, or you're going to come and eat together tonight. It didn't help. Didn't help unify the teams at all. They'd argue about what movie to watch. They'd argue about like how much food. But as soon as they had a superordinate goal that they needed to work together on, that's what bonded the group. So this out of this came the realistic group conflict theory. It's basically that groups will get competitive over resources. All that stuff is real obvious. This is one of those things where, like, you know, you think to yourself, yeah, no kidding, you had to do an experiment. Even this whole thing. Oh, you had to do an experiment to figure this out? This is so obvious. This is like every group of kids that hangs out together, and there's another group of kids at the other end of the street, and they hang out together, and if there's scarce resources, they're going to fight. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was an interesting, real clear example of the fact that we're tribal animals.
Yeah.
And if you're not paying attention, you can become part of a tribe. You don't even recognize that you're part of this tribe, and you start thinking things that you have no actual reason for thinking, but you're thinking them. Yeah. And if you're not paying attention, that can happen.
Yeah.
So my overall advice is pay attention. You don't want to be an eagle. You don't want to be a rattler. They have no fundamental reason for this anger and prejudice against each other. But then it escalates from little things. You know, it's just a little thing. Oh, you ate some of our cake. Oh, well, then we're going to take your cake and we're going to smash it. Okay, then we're going to burn your flag. Okay, we're going to raid your cabins. You let that go. If the researchers let that go, who knows, man? Maybe someone's getting killed.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That's basically what gangs do.
Yeah, that is.
So be careful.
Yeah, big time. And obviously, you know, you explaining that whole thing, you can think of all the different examples, varying levels of it, where the first one comes to mind, obviously, is the sports fans, right? How they always get into the fights and, you know, and the thing 100% based on a sports team that they've probably never played for, never gonna play for, probably don't even know personally, you know, they don't have a personal relationship with not one single member of the whole company, not even just the team, like nothing, never met them in real life, whatever, and they're still that unified over the fact that they play in that city, you know? And you're right, it stems from like that one commonality, right? That one like common interest in whatever way. And then from there, it just grows. Almost like you forget the common interest. You just have that feeling and then you just move forward almost automatically in a way. So it's like, okay, someone who opposes the San Diego Chargers. I know they're not in San Diego anymore, but my psychological example is San Diego Chargers. So anyone who opposes the San Diego Chargers, they're kind of like the enemy in this little seed in my mind, you know? So anything that kind of confirms that just exacerbates it more and more and more. Same thing about your presidential candidate of choice, you know? Oh, that freaking Trump supporter or that whatever supporter, you know, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm not that. So they're on the other team and then freaking just hostility from there.
Hostility. You know, when JP was on the podcast, we were talking about getting a platoon to break when we were running training. All you have to do is create some little kernel of animosity between the troops and they just self-destruct, bro. And that's what's going on. That's what's going on in America. You know, it's like, what you should be thinking is you should be thinking, hey, if I'm mad at Echo because he believes this thing, that's actually, no matter where I'm at, that's bad for everybody. It's bad for America. Yeah. If I'm mad at you because you have a different political belief than me, and instead of me going, oh yeah, well, you know, it's America, and he can support his ideas and I'll support my ideas, and we'll see which one goes further, and I'll continue to work against what he's think, but I'm not mad at him. Yeah. But the minute I'm like, no, I actually hate Echo. Yeah. Now, because that kernel grows, man. Yeah. It grows big time. And now actually, I don't just hate the fact that you don't like this one political thing that I like. Now I hate everything about you. Yeah. Now I hate every political belief you have. Yeah. It's been weird to watch the way things have flipped upside down in the political spectrum, where, like, for instance, the Democrats pretty much being like pro big pharma now is kind of crazy. Yeah. And them being basically pro war in Ukraine, when you would traditionally think of who's supporting the big companies. Oh, it's the Republicans. Yeah. Or who's supporting war? Oh, it's the Republicans. Now you have a literal flip of that. Yeah.
Yep. And it doesn't surprise me given this one thing that I witnessed from some insiders. So I'm not going to name nobody's name. But so this one insider had a meeting with another insider. And this meeting had another person involved in it who said, we're going to block this. And it was like some bill or some thing, right? Some law. We're going to block this bill, even though it's a good bill. And in fact, we all talked about passing this bill like 2 years ago. But since they kind of formulated it in or finalized it or whatever, I don't know the terms. But since they basically announced it first, like it's their bill, they want to block it. Even though it's like literally the one that they had, you know, so it's a good bill. Everyone agrees on it. But since they did it, it was the other political side. Since they're bringing it out, we're going to block it. That's how deep it goes. Like for the whole country at risk, by the way.
Pathetic.
Oh, yeah. So that kind of stuff gets
idiots.
surprising. Oh, yeah.
These freaking idiots. That's what they are. They're a bunch of freaking idiots. They're donkeys. I've mentioned this a few times. That is a little excerpt of what we are doing on the Jocko Underground podcast. So if you want to continue to listen, go to jockounderground.com and subscribe. And we're doing this to mitigate our reliance on external platforms so we are not subject to their control. And we're doing it so we can give you more control, more interaction, more direct connections, better communications with us, strengthen this legion of troopers that are in the game with us. So thank you. It's jockounderground.com. It costs $8.18 a month. And if you can't afford to support us, we can still support you. Just email assistance@jockounderground.com and we'll get you taken care of. Until then, we will see you mobilized underground.